All right, going to look at creating pivot tables and pivot charts here. If you've done them in Excel before, then you might find this easy. If you've never seen them before, I think it's accessible. The nice thing about pivot tables is once you have the data sort of in that kind of that first normal form relation I keep talking to, just as kind of that regular layout, with kind of the dimensions and columns and facts. We'll look at it. It makes very easy analysis, and you can get pretty good representations, something to investigate, even give to clients, make them pretty, and the whole bit. So it's just a great tool for data analysis. There's lots of things that have come on since. This is kind of like the granddaddy or maybe the first cut analysis. And as usual, kind of seeing it to me is better than talking about how good it's going to be. So I'm going to create these three things, and you get to recreate them in your assignment. Then you get to show me a couple of things that you're going to do different. But let's just kind of jump in, and I might refer back to this. But first, here we have, this is our OLAP cube. I never maybe said why we call it a cube. We call it a cube because we have kind of dimensions, things that maybe drive the analysis or the result. The customer, the employee, the shipper, all drove then these facts: a gross order amount, how much the order was discounted, and the order net. So in parlance of like data mining and all, these are called facts. And these, the ID part at least, are called dimensions, and then these kind of are facts that go along with the dimension. We like to think of the shipper name rather than maybe just the ID, and employee name and company name and country, and region is the state, or if in Canada, British Columbia, but not everyone has a region. So that's why they kind of call it a cube, thinking this one happens to have three dimensions, but it could be a quote hypercube that has many dimensions that drive facts. Sometimes the terminology around business intelligence and data mining and data warehousing makes it sound outer space. And it can get very complicated getting it all together and doing the analysis. And you may even find, that's the fact here, but it's nothing that is that so advanced we don't get it. This is a cube, even though, it just looks like a list with data. Our first task was to kind of create what's called a cross tab, showing how many shipments each shipper made to each customer and their average gross, every time they did a shipment. So each of these lines, it turns out represents an order or an interaction between the two. And the way to get started is, be sure you've kind of clicked in to the table here somewhere. Excel will understand then that that's what you want to create the data from. But if I went to the insert table, and I'm going to, or insert tab, and I'm selecting pivot table as the thing I want to insert. And then first you select a table or range. And so, this table has a name. Excel highlighted it, anticipating, well, gosh, I got a table here, a relation. I think that's what you're going to want to analyze. And as a default, it suggests, I'm going to create the pivot table on a new worksheet, which I recommend in this case usually, and we can put multiple pivot tables on a page. I'll show you how that looks and works in a little bit, but usually I start off putting them on a new worksheet. And so when I click OK, I'm flipped over to, it gave this name sheet 1. I'm moving it to the right. I think if here's the data and here's the result. I ask you at the end of the day to call that customer shipments, and so that's just on the tab. But when you click in here, you get the pivot table fields, and if that ever kind of disappears when you click on this, you can just say, collect field list to see it again. Okay, and the way to think about a pivot table is you have usually a dimension that goes along the rows, and in this case, the guidance said, we want a crosstab. A crosstab means one dimension on the row, another dimension on the column. And I'll show you how that goes. And it can come out. So you kind of put a dimension down here in rows and see how it listed all the customers. They happen to be in alphabetical order, one line per customer. The crosstab said that by shipper, and I'm using the name just because it looks a little bit more interesting. Okay, and so it says, okay, where I saw 3 customers there, and then it said it wanted 2 things. It wanted the average gross, for a shipment, and the number of shipments. All right, and so what that says, this value is kind of like the fact or the summary. That so I dragged order gross down here, and what it did as a default was put the sum of order gross down there. Well, we can, and I'm going to pull on this and use value field settings to say, well, we don't want the sum, we want the average. And we might, just to save some room, instead of average of order gross, I'm just going to shorten that and call it average gross. Okay, I'll just do that. There's something else that I want to do, but so that just kind of put that up here and kind of change things. I'm looking at the format, for these, and we don't need all those decimal places. We'd like it to be more consistent, so I'm going to use this. I could have done that, go back to value field settings, but use number format. And I kind of like accounting and 0 decimal places. We can round off to the dollar for this. Accounting puts commas at the thousands. I think it'll turn negative numbers red. We don't need to see dollar signs everywhere. So if I do OK and OK again, we are getting this thing just a lot prettier looking. And so this tells me that on average, when federal shipping shipped to Alfred's Furukista, it was $850, $51 gross. This is just one result here. What we can do, we really want to count the number of shipments. It almost doesn't matter what we count, but when I count things, and well, I'll put it down, there. I'd like to kind of pull the ID in the sense of counting, and we don't want, as a default, it's summed up those numbers. Okay, what I wanted to do, I'm coming to value field settings, and I'm saying, I don't want you to sum those. I want you to count, and we don't want count of rec ID there. These things are shipments in terms of the number of shipments. And now you can see with the 2 things, we're getting, something that it's getting near professional in terms of layout. For federal shipping, there's their average gross, there's their shipments. For Speedy Express, same. United Package, similar. And if we come all the way out, if you click out of the table, that disappears, and then we get the totals over here. Okay, I don't think there's anything you can do about the totals. We're going to put total average gross. It's really not the sum, it's really the average, but I don't think there's a way you can change that, right? Yeah, might be. I would rather have average, but it should, or maybe summary of average gross, but that's how it goes. I think, and it doesn't really matter all that much, but I think in terms of kind of presentation, the number of shipments before the total is a good way to, better way to think of it. Had 1 shipment, on average this. Okay, that's just, and I think that's how I laid out the example. I think those columns are about as small as I can make them. You can work with this label here. So sometimes the it just put row labels as a thing there. Well, let's help the reader out. Those are customers, and up here in the columns, we had do the same thing. Just say, okay, here we're talking about shippers. I think I've kind of made all the changes, and here in the matter of just a few minutes, we've got a fairly interesting analysis, and and that's, I think, all the requirements. And this gives a little bit something to explore, and maybe will lead us to come up with some conclusions and questions. If I go down to the bottom, and this is something we're going to test later, I say, gosh, this one has a kind of a bigger average than these. I'm wondering if that average, it's statistically significant. Is it a big enough difference that it's out of the noise or not? Well, we'll come back maybe and check that later. But that's a pivot table. We had a second one that asked us to do a pivot chart. Okay, well, a table and a chart on the same tab. That is, I'm now looking at this requirement. Employee sales, a chart and a graph of gross and net sales for employees. And these links here, when you do the assignment, show you, here's kind of what it looks like. So this is just practice doing something. So I'm going to get back to the starting point, and I'm going to insert. And if I come over here to pivot chart, kind of does the same thing. It says, okay, what data do you want to use? And it was this data I was in, and that's good. And I'm going to put this on a new worksheet. And so now you got a table and a chart together. And I'm just going to start working on it. This one said, okay, we really wanted to have our dimension, maybe the axis category, to be employee name. Okay. It kind of goes by employee, and we have a couple of things that we want to graph, and let's just kind of get them in there. They said, we wanted gross sales, and we wanted net sales. Okay, so boy, that's the sense of it that quick. We got maybe a little bit of cleaning up that we might want to do, but that's really the sense of it. We can change this to employees. I don't know if I did that in the example. All right, just kind of doing things that label. The labels come out just a little bit better. I'd like to format these values again. The pennies don't really make a difference here, and it really kind of, when it mixes and matches, and some are 1, some are none, some are 2. And we can probably round this off to dollars. And again, you get that in value field settings, going to numeric format, accounting. I wish maybe, and there might be somewhere in Excel to say, could I change the default? So that was gross sales and net sales. And we want number format. We do want the sum here. We looked at how to change things, and we want this accounting and no decimal places, and don't need the dollar signs, and okay. And so that is just a much neater, tidier analysis. And we got things you can actually so if you want to single in on people, so there is some selectivity that can go on here in the chart. But it looks like Margaret Peacock, at least in total, is the leader, and somewhere down here. But there's a question whether that is there a statistically significant difference? I bet you there is. Just because it looks different in total, there might be something going on that's total, but maybe fewer sales might be a reason. And that's where data science would come into. Is there a reason for that? But in terms of that's how to make that kind of chart, and that quick, and it was kind of understanding what we wanted to do and where we wanted to go. Again, I think I asked you to call that guy employee sales. Sometimes when you do these things, it's good to order and rename these tabs. So I forget what was sheet 14, the employee sales, or was that sheet 15? By renaming them when you're on there is just a good way to go. So there's that. Pivot table analysis. The last example that I've asked you to do in this Northwind, and then you get to turn loose and do some of your own, was to do discount summary, and it's going to summarize gross sales, discount, and a discount percent, but for employees and for customers. So that's going to be 2 pivot tables on the same tab, and it's going to involve calculating a column, but no big problem. Kind of start at your data, insert a pivot table, This one we are going to select. It's going to go into a new worksheet for this one. When we make our second pivot table, we're just going to put it on an existing worksheet where the other one. So you can have multiple pivot tables and charts, and you can really design a dashboard in Excel. And one of the nice things about Excel, it's everywhere. Everybody knows how to use it. Some people kind of sneer, doesn't, with lots of data or real complicated analyses, it goes off. But boy, it sure, to me, it might be that Pareto gets 80% of the work done for 20% of the effort. And there are lots of very good tools right on this VM. Tableau, Alteryx that can do some things. We'll be looking at Power BI. But anyway, getting off. So, you only used Excel. You don't know what you're doing. I don't know that I agree there. But we're taking the data, inserting a new pivot table, and for the first one they said, well, we wanted by employee as kind of our dimension, and we wanted sales, like gross. Oops, gross didn't get all the way down there. And discount, we're kind of just looking at the discounts and all, and good. And so we have it for this. And again, when you want to clean up, do you wait till the end? What I call that, sales, discounts. Let's see, if we want to clean up the format while we're here, number format. I wanted none. Okay, just to me, that's just a lot neater. And like I said, I wish there was a quicker way to do that on the discounts value field, settings, and number format, and accounting. And there might be, I don't know, kind of, there is the, kind of that format, kind of setter or something. But okay, by hook or by crook, there's employee sales. What we'd like to do is, we've got one more thing to do with this though. We wanted a discount percent. It's kind of nice to say, or you can think about 11,000 discount, but is that big compared to the sales? So what we'd like to have is a column here that tells us what percent this is of this, but make it part of the table. And the way you get that in is while you're on the pivot table, and make sure if you don't see it, you get over in design. There's this fields, items, and sets up here in the menu. And what we want to do is insert a calculated field. And it's going to be, I'm going to call it disk PCT. And we can make a formula. Okay, we can make a formula that calculates that. Notice it put it here. Okay, and it also put it down here, and it added it to the table. Now it's showing up as 0, and it's really going to do the calculation, but so it's not really the sum of, it is the calculation. But it's important on this guy to format that as a percentage. And wait a minute, I'm on the, let's see, I don't know what I did wrong there. See, the value is really that. So I might not have grabbed the right thing. And I want to do value field settings. Oh, interesting. Gotcha. It was complaining about, so I'm coming down to percentage and maybe 1%. I'm going to call it because it won't let me. It's kind of because it named it over here. I see what's happening. I'm just going to call it this percent. You can't name this column heading the same thing as this name over here. I guess I could rename that. Yeah. Anyway, there's probably a way to get that, but there's the idea. So yeah, we have something. A question I'm going to look at in another video is, boy, Robert King seems to be the discount king. You know, is he really significantly up above others on average? We might want to look at that. But the spec said, well, that's great. That's discounts by employee, but on the same thing that we're going to name discounts summary, and I'm going to move it there just because it appeals to me. What we'd like to do is have another pivot table, and there's nothing to keep you from doing that. This time when we go to insert pivot table, it's going to highlight that range. We're always using that data range, but what we're going to do is use an existing worksheet, and if I hit this little squiggly thing here, it will let me point into the worksheet where I'd like that to go. Notice that's still up here, so if I kind of click on that again, it will kind of put that location, whatever it happened to be, as where I'd like to go, and OK. So now I've got a separate pivot table here. This one we said, you know, make the customer the dimension. Get this down. We want the gross, and we want the discount. And I'll go ahead and do it all. Format those guys. Prettier. For our purposes, okay. Customer. Better title there. Better title there. Yeah, I can make this a little smaller. It won't show all the names. You know, you can double click up here just to get that column to come down to nothing. Oh, by the way, accounting format, if it's 0, it kind of just shows it as that dash. If I bring up this field list, what we want to do is add. So I'll go over to the Analyze tab, and sorry, I think I said Design before. It's on the Analyze tab for pivot tables to insert a calculated field. And yeah, I think if I leave that as, we did need to give it a name, but it's the same formula. It is discount. Oh, got to get that 0 out of there. Divided by, and I'm just highlighting, and notice I called it field 1 over here. Interesting, but it didn't add it to the, okay, now it'll add it to the table. And we don't want it that, we want it DISPCT, just making it match this other guy. And then we got one little bit of work and get that thing formatted, discount percent, because it's a percentage, number format, parts per 100, right? Maybe 1 decimal place makes it look kind of official. We don't need much more than that. And now we've done, and again, just a few minutes, a great deal of data analysis. If discounts were the thing, one of the hard things sometimes about pivot tables is not knowing where to head. What is it you want to find out? What might give you some information? If you're told specifically what to do, it's pretty easy. And there's lots and lots, we haven't demonstrated about pivot tables, the things they can do, and a timeline and slicers. So it's one of those, the more you practice, the better you get. But boy, for a first edge cut on what's going on here, it's a good way to go. It's something you ought to know. If you're in data management, you ought to be decent with pivot tables. Again, if you start with something like reasonably good data. All right, so that's the talk. See you later.